Hello and welcome to the Teacher's Guide to Educating ELL ESL Students. And here's the beginning of the workshop. And I have just a quick reminder that you can pick up the full workshop right here at the Teachers Pay Teachers store. Give you a quick look, and let's start the workshop. Okay, so here's the introduction page, and it says Teacher's Guide to Educating ESL ELL Students. And the workshop is brought to you by this channel, Teachings in Education. So let's start with understanding the vocabulary of students. And there's a lot of different terms here, so we're just going to go over the most important ones or the ones that you hear most. First off, ELL. That stands for English Language Learner, which is basically someone who isn't currently proficient as an English speaker. So all it's saying is that they're not a proficient speaker of English. Right underneath you have ESL, which just basically says right here English as a second language. So it's just somebody who's learning English as their second language, right? They could learn, maybe they learn Spanish as their first language, Chinese as their first language, doesn't matter. But English is the second language that they're learning. Next is a bilingual student. Bilingual students are kind of defined by their teacher, and bilingual means speaking two different languages. So bilingual students are somebody that's taught subject matter in their native language, and it doesn't have to be Spanish. It could be another language, and in English. So they learn the content in both English and in their native language. LEP student. That stands for Limited English Proficiency. So it's a student that lacks proficiency in English and is defined by federal legislation. That's why it's basically the same thing as ELL and ESL students. Don't get too carried away with the definition because there's just different ways of describing these students. And the last one here on this list is emergent bilingual, and that's kind of like a new term, and it's meant to replace LEP, ESL, ELL, etc., and so forth. So let's take a look at some infographics. All right, so the first one here, ELL, right? That stands for English Language Learners. And ELL students are part of the general education classroom. They also could be in an they can also be in an ESL classroom. They could be part of a bilingual classroom if they're learning English. Again, ELL students are defined as just somebody that's unable to fluently communicate in English. Next one. All right, LEP it's a term that's interchangeable, so you can use it in term of ELL. You can switch it around. It says here an LEP student is basically any student who's not able to speak proficiently in English, and basically it's used more by federal legislators, right? Because it has to do with standardized tests. So limited English proficiency, as by as they what do you call it? As they give a child a standardized test. If they don't meet the standardized test, they don't meet proficiency, so they're limited English proficiency. And the difference here really is that ELL is used more by school districts, and LEP is used by federal legislation. Let's keep going, right? Emergent bilingual. This is the new term. This is what everybody's talking about. It's going to be used to replace LEP, ELL, and the rest of them. But the reason they use this really is that it's positive, emergent bilingual, right? So it just basically takes the negative connotations away. So emergent bilingual is like, okay, they're learning something. Okay, they're becoming bilingual. It's a positive way of describing these students. Now, you might not hear it that much. I don't know if it's gaining traction, but that's the new term that's coming up. Okay, just a heads up here, right? These terms, LEP, ELL, ESL, and emergent bilingual are often used interchangeably. So, focus on the child. Don't worry about the definitions, okay? Because there's all different ways to describe students that are learning English. Here's a vocabulary that has to do with the teachers, right? You hear these, ESL, bilingual, TESOL, TEFL. There's all different terms, right? But you really don't, you don't always know what they mean. So let's start with an ESL teacher. ESL teachers work with ELL students to help them develop fluency in English. Bilingual teachers, they teach actually content, and they teach it in two languages, right? They might teach biology in the student's native language and then teach biology in English. Whereas ESL teachers, again, are just teaching what? They're just trying to teach these students to learn English. TESOL, right? That stands for Teacher of English to Students of Other Languages. and TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language, and this involves teaching students actually abroad. So TEFL has to do with teaching students abroad. Okay, bilingual versus ESL classrooms. What's the difference? All right, an ESL classroom can have a variety of different students speaking different languages. So if you're talking about an ESL classroom, you can have one student that maybe speaks Brazilian, and another student that maybe five students speak Spanish, and another student speaks Chinese, and they're all trying to learn English, right? It doesn't all have to be the same native language. Whereas in a bilingual class, all students speak the same native language. For example, maybe it's a bilingual Spanish class, right? So all the kids in there speak Spanish and they're learning English. In an ESL class, the teacher speaks only in English, whereas in a bilingual class, the teacher focuses on content and then teaches that content in two different languages, right? So they're going to teach it one in Spanish, and then they'll teach, again in English, right? So they'll do a biology lesson on the cell in Spanish and a biology lesson on the cell in English. ESL classes are electives, okay, and the teacher focuses on teaching students to speak English. All right, so here's a little infographic, and just it gives you a comparison here. Take a look at one side, take a look at the other side, and just basically in a bilingual classroom, the teacher must be able to speak a second language. For an ESL classroom, the teachers, they don't have to be able to speak a different language. There's different different things that you have to go through for certification between a bilingual teacher and an ESL teacher. Okay, something very interesting now. We're going to go into the stages of second language acquisition. Excuse me. First language acquisition is the process of learning your first language. That's your home language. Second language acquisition is the process that a person goes through as they develop an understanding and they're able to speak the second language, right? So the first language is what you learn at home, and the second language is what you're learning second, right? So ELL students that have a strong first language skills are going to have it much easier acquiring a second language. So outlined next, I'm going to give you the 5 stages of the second language acquisition. Now there's different versions. Maybe you'll see one where there's 6 different stages, but normally it's 5 stages from what I've seen. All right, the 5 stages of second language acquisition. First stage is the silent period, followed by early production, speech emergence, immediate fluency, and advanced fluency. ELL students must reach the advanced fluency stage to be able to fully break down, analyze, discuss, and evaluate academic content. Okay, so if you want them to be able to learn a lesson on maybe causes of World War II, they're going to have to be, in English, they're going to have to go through all 5 stages, and they're going to have to master and get to that advanced fluency stage. So now we're going to take a look at each individual stage. Okay, the first one is the silent period. The first stage of the silent period is students, they primarily just listen and try to absorb information. What they do is they just repeat words. So they'll have an English vocabulary of about 500 words. And the silent period lasts from a day to 6 months, anywhere in between there. Now that's not a perfect number, but it's just an estimate. And on the side here, you'll see some tips for instruction. Being very animated when speaking, incorporating visuals, avoiding idioms, and speaking very slowly. So that's stage 1. Okay, stage 2, early production. Students speak in 1 or 2 word responses. They say hello, they say yes. Their vocabulary has grown to about 1,000 words, and this could last up to 6 months. Some tips for instruction include giving students the opportunities for 1 or 2 word responses. So ask them a question and give them the chance to say yes or no. Slowly teach students short responses. Thank you very much. That'd be a good one. And encourage students to express themselves, right? Because this is early production. They want a lot of encouragement here. All right, number 3, speech emergence. Students are catching on and they can speak short phrases or parts of sentences. So take a look at the kid in the info on the slide here. He says, "Can I go to the nurse?" That's a short sentence. Vocabulary about 3,000 words, and this could last about a year. Tips for instruction include the language experience approach. I'm going to get to that later on. and provide opportunities for students to read aloud in a non-judgmental classroom environment. Okay, intermediate fluency. Now that we're starting to get somewhere. Students will be able to form sentences and engage in conversations, but with grammar errors. So take a look here. Why did you divide X over there? They got a vocabulary about 6,000 words, and this lasts for about 2 years. Incorporate vocabulary development as a tip for instruction. Introduce English expressions. You can utilize graphic organizers and teach word etymology. Etymology. Okay, now we got to the last stage, advanced fluency. Students will feel as comfortable in English as their native language. This is where you want to get them, right? Advanced fluency. Take a look here. You got a gentleman speaking. He's saying, here is some poetry. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, and the Robert Frost poem. Um, Students learn more and more words as time goes on. And the duration is very interesting here. Just to take a look down here. It's 5 to 8 years, so it takes a lot of time. Some tips for instruction. Continually correct students when they make errors in speaking. Assign classroom presentations, so let them get up there. Let them get up there, let them present. Have discussions, and as you're having discussions with the students, incorporate higher order thinking skills. All right, so communicating with ELL students. Any teacher that works with ELL students is responsible for doing their best to get these students to learn and understand the content. The problem is that many teachers feel that the onus is on the ELL students to understand what they're saying, right? They feel like, okay, I have to go up there, and this is just a regular, high school English teacher. They go, okay, it's my job to teach this material, and this the ELL student, they have to learn English and then learn it. No, no, it's really not. That doesn't really help. Um, However, there's several communication strategies that can really help the teacher better communicate and help the student understand what they're saying. So what I'm going to go through next is a bunch of different communication strategies, so that that'll help the teacher get their message across to the ELL student. All right, so here are several tips, and I'm just going to go down the list and I'll get into a little detail on all of them. Number one, avoid using slangs, acronyms, and English expressions. You can't expect these children to know what that means. Frequently check for understanding. Don't raise your voice. Summarize. Speak slowly. Utilize hand signals. Be very animated while you're speaking and during the lesson. You should always be animated. Draw pictures if you can. And pronounce all syllables. All right, so here's the first one. Avoid acronyms, slangs, and American expressions. ELL students learn slang, acronyms, expression. They learn that later on in language development, right? So it's going to take time for these students to learn, American expressions. Hang tight, ride shotgun. It's going to take time and just experience to learn what they mean. Speaking slowly and being animated is a skill that professional speakers use. They speak very slowly. They're animated, and great classroom teachers should be able to do this too. And it really helps the message get across to the ELL students. Okay. Use signaling. This is actually great for formative assessments to ask them if they understand something. Have them rate their excuse me. Have them rate their level of understanding from 1 to 5. Five being that they've mastered it, one being that they have no clue. Hand signals are also great for if they want to go to the bathroom. One is the bathroom, two means the nurse, three means a drink of water, things like that. When you're speaking, try to pronounce all syllables, right? You want to enunciate, especially if you have an accent. Enunciate is again, it's gonna help all the students understand. Oh, hold on, I jumped ahead here. Okay, a couple more tips here. Let me go back. Don't raise your voice to a student. if you're talking to an ELL student and they give you a look like they don't understand what you're saying, don't raise your voice because that gives off the idea that you might be mad at them. So you want to avoid doing that. Summarize what you're saying. And if you can, draw pictures on the whiteboard or things like that. Remember, you want to get the message across. And here's the last communication tip. Frequently stop and check to see if the students understand. And again, this is good with all students. Oftentimes, teachers just move too fast, and the ELL students just really have no clue what's going on. I mean, I know as a teacher you can't wait forever, but stop, check for understanding. Okay, now if you really want to help these ELL students, and you care about their education, one of the most important thing is building relationships with their parents. And now it says, unfortunately, parents of ELL students are not usually as involved with the school as other parents. Poor communication and lack of relationships building is responsible for their lack of involvement, right? The research shows that parents of ELL students aren't as involved in the school district as English speaking parents. So, you really got to go out there and you got to try to form these relationships. All it takes is a few dedicated teachers to change the amount of parent involvement. So I'm going to give you a couple different strategies here, and then I'll outline them, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail on all of them. All right, so number one, add their culture to your classroom. Invite parents to chaperone a field trip. Try to attend their community events. Specifically, invite parents to Board of Education meetings. Provide an interpreter at the meeting. Translate any verbal or written communication, and send welcome letters, holiday cards, things like that. All right, so the first one here, send a welcome letter, early on in the year. That cultural holiday cards, that's good so that you get the parents not forgetting who you are. Building relationship, it's best. Listen, it's best to have as many face-to-face interactions with parents. That's the best way to form a relationship. Emails, things always go wrong, but actually meeting people is the best way to form a relationship. So how do you meet them? You can invite them to a field trip. They're more than capable of chaperoning a field trip. Attend community cultural events. Being seen in the communities, that's important, and it's part of teaching too. Again, to build relationships with the parents, in order to build long-lasting relationships, you have to incorporate a number of different outreach methods, right? It's not just I met them at I met them at back to school night and I did my job. No, you gotta do more than that. So translate any verbal or written communication so that they understand what's going on. Specifically, invite them to Board of Education meetings. They probably don't go as often, so invite them in, and provide an interpreter for these meetings, which you have to do by law anyway if they don't know. Especially for like if it's an ELL student also has an IEP and things like that. More ways to build a relationship with parents. Show the students and their parents that you have an appreciation of their cultural heritage, right? So try to bring their culture into your classroom. Hang posters, have a cultural day, and integrate your students' culture into the curriculum. That's probably the most important thing, right? Readings and things like that. You want to have readings and assignments that have cultural significance to their personal background, right? That's how you're going to increase engagement. So that's really important there, right? Integrate your students' culture into the curriculum. You want to highlight that. Supporting ELL students in the classroom. All right, this is the next section here. Schools are increasingly taking in the number of ELL students, and the rate is continuing to increase. These new ELL, these English language learners, they have a difficult time integrating into the mainstream classroom. They have to adjust to the American culture and to the culture of each individual school, right? Every school has its own unique culture. So, still, so it's going to be very difficult for them, but teachers can ease the integration process by providing several supports for these students. So I'm going to go over a couple supports up next. Here's the first one, and it's very easy to do. When you have a new ELL student to your classroom, always assign them a classroom buddy. Now, the buddy you assign has to be responsible. You want to assign somebody that can speak the same language as an ELL student. These children can be lonely. And hopefully this classroom buddy will help the student out academically and socially, right? Making friends. So pick somebody responsible. Other ways to support students. Print instructions on the board. don't use script or cursive, handwriting. It's tough enough to read that. Always read back what was printed on the whiteboard. Provide extended time. Okay, these children are entitled to accommodations, right? So provide extended time and other necessary accommodations. You know, possibly reduce the lengths of assignments is another choice. Here are a couple more ways to support these kids. Teach important words. Remember, we talked about the 5 stages of language acquisition. So, as the child goes through these 5 stages, they're going to pick up more and more words, but you want them to learn the important words first, right? So, if you look at the right, like the words like teacher, book, homework, fire drill, in case anything wrong, anything dangerous happened, that's an important word or important phrase. Make sure the students aren't relying on a dictionary. You can give them a bilingual dictionary. That can help. But if you do give a bilingual dictionary, don't let them, rely on it. Teaching ESL, ELL students, it can be difficult. So teachers, they got to be patient and never get upset. Over here it says have a warm attitude. So ELL students can easily interpret a teacher's negative attitude as being displeased with them. So try to smile at these kids and make them feel welcome. All right, so here's the first classroom instructional strategy that I want to go over. It's called Realia, if I'm saying that correctly. It's a classroom instructional strategy whereby you take real life objects that are used to build student vocabulary, to develop understanding, and make real life connections. It's a multi-sensory approach where students first see the object, then they get to touch it in their hand and smell it and play with it and things like that, right? Ultimately, you want the students to make real life connections with the concrete object. So let students play with and explore these objects while the teacher is reading aloud. So use Realia to introduce new topics, student culture, common objects. Science teachers can use it with models. Okay. Foreign language teachers use this. A Spanish, an Italian teacher, a Spanish teacher, a Russian teacher. They use this. They use this method as well. It's not just for ESL or content. Everybody uses this instructional strategy. It can be listen, this can be a very memorable and exciting lesson for these kids, right? Being able to, if you, instead of showing a flashcard of a piece of cake, why not bring in an actual piece of cake, right? And imagine the excitement of them actually eating it. I know this sounds like everything is good, but there are some cons, right? There's pros and cons to everything here. So you have to be creative with these lessons. Okay, it can be difficult to find objects. Nowadays you always have to worry about safety. But again, there's a lot of good that comes from it because they get to smell, touch, hear, and with these objects, and they get to make connections to it, and it helps them better learn the meaning of the vocabulary and things like that. Okay, all right. So here are just some examples that you can bring in. You can bring in clothes, food, mathematics, manipulatives, field trips. Or take a field trip, excuse me, to the garden. You can show photos of obscure objects if you can't find them. Show and tell with animals. And lately, there's something called a virtual realia, which is like a safer approach. It can be quite engaging. All right, so now let's go to the language experience approach. All right, this is a great way to get these students to open up. It's going to get them to talk about their real life. So it also helps build relationship. This is the language experience approach. It helps build relationships between teachers and students, and it's used for any type of student requiring reading intervention because it kind of focuses on reading. And what's great is that students are able to get an emotional an emotional connection to the curriculum when they use this strategy. So up next, I'm going to tell you what it is and how you can incorporate it. All right, so in this activity, students take their own personal life stories and life experiences, and they use that to create classroom readings and classroom curricula. So you take a look here, there's a student, and he's saying, this is my life story, and then the teacher goes, okay, that's going to be our reading for today. And here's how you actually incorporate the language experience approach into your instruction. So first, the student tells a personal story. The teacher writes the story word for word. Each student's personal life experience becomes part of the curriculum. So as the student tells his own personal story here, like if you take a look at the picture down here, the kid's telling a story about his vacation, and the teacher's writing it down. Now, if the teacher don't write it down, you could have another paraprofessional write it down, or maybe another student if you want to pair them up. After the story is written down, the story is read to the student by the teacher or the paraprofessional or the other student. The person who scribes the story is going to read it back to the student. Now, as the story is read back to the student reads along. Lastly, the student reads the story on their own and answers questions on the story. And then you make an activity out of it, and the student's own personal life becomes a curriculum, and and it does increase engagement. Using the language experience teaching strategies, it does develop on early reading skills and fluency for ELL students. So it develops fluency through reading and listening. It helps build vocabulary, and most importantly, encoding. Right, they encode words as the story is read to them. So, for example, here the students watching, the teacher write them down and reading it back to them, and they're being able to, encode the words, and they develop reading fundamentals. All right, so we talked about realia, we talked about language experience approach. Now I'm going to talk about what's called a culture study. Is another sort of teaching strategy. Very similar. Culture studies are great assignments for the entire classroom, but specifically ELL students. When assigning a culture study to the higher grades, you want to require them to fully research a culture, write an introduction, pose a question, present a bibliography, and finish with a conclusion statement. Now that's for the higher grades, right? If it's younger grades, it could be as basic as a show and tell or presentation of a poster board. Why culture studies? Because students enjoy talking about themselves and as an extension about their culture. Culture studies help students feel accepted as the class acknowledges their background, right? Anybody likes to talk about themselves. We said with the language experience approach, they also like to talk about their culture and their own country. You can assign it as an individual research assignment or a research project, or and then they can present their findings to the class. So how does it work? Well, they're given as a class project. Students identify their culture. They research the culture. They can do interviews. They can interview relatives. They can go find information on the internet, gather all that information, present that as a project to the class, and finish by taking questions and answers on it. Culture studies, they've got connections to 21st century life skills. Why is that? Because they're going to present to their class for public speaking, hands-on learning because they have to research themselves and interview and things like that. They also have to write something. But again, it doesn't have to be that serious. If you're younger grades, you want to do a show and tell. Just have them bring in objects of cultural significance to them and let them present it to the class. And it's a way to build relationships. Um, Students can tell personal stories. They can do storytelling. Again, it helps everybody get to sort of know each other. And here's just a nice overview of everything I went through here with why culture studies. Just a nice infographic here. So I'll wait a second, let you look at this. All right, so accommodations for ELL students, right? So teachers must provide ELL students with equal access to the curriculum, right? That's what accommodations are, not modifications. Modifications are changes to the curriculum. Accommodations are just access. So you want to have equal access. Accommodations are not only going to help these students understand the content, but it'll help them develop their English. Accommodations should provide students the ability to complete their assignments while increasing engagement. Okay, so not only does it help them complete their assignments, but because they have more access, they should be more engaged. Here's the list of just some common accommodations that you might want to use, and you should be using: graphic organizers, audio books, flashcards, extended time, preferential seating, peer tutoring, test read aloud, bilingual dictionaries, manipulatives, native language text, and there's more, much more. All right. So the title of this thing is Educating ELL ESL Students, right? You got to respect the challenge. It's not going to be easy, right? So do some teachers feel that ELL students are a burden to their teaching? Do they feel helpless? Do they got anxiety, working with these students? The answer is yes, they do. A lot of teachers do. But if you take a look at the right here, where does this anxiety stem from? Where does it come from? Here are a couple reasons why. Teaching ELL students is a difficult challenge for the following reasons. One, the lack of time to work with these students. They when they come into the class, they're behind, and it's a lot of work. So it's going to be more time. Two, lack of training. There's not much professional development, not much training go into working with these kids, and it's more work. It's just more. The more students you get, it's just more papers to grade, and it's like I said, there's a lot you got to do, right? So those are just a couple reasons. All right. Prioritizing ELL students. Do they get prioritized? So what type of students do schools care about most? Well, special education students because they're protected by law. Okay, they have an IEP. Students with involved parents, right? ELL, we said students, usually the parents aren't involved. And students with behavior problems, they command attention. The students that aren't well behaved, they wind up getting the most from schools always. They get the most attention. They get the best teachers. Um, you know, so where do ESL, ELL students fit in? You know, um, because ELL students aren't categorized as special ed, they don't have involved parents. They aren't behavior problems. They fall through the cracks often. So the classroom teacher is like the last line of defense. So you as a teacher, it's up to you to really prioritize these children and to work sided. Check out the list here. Now, if I'm going to go back a second. Now, if you want to, the best thing you can do here with this, having sat through this presentation is if you're in a school, maybe you take this and you don't have to share the video, but present it yourself. You know what I mean? You could lead your own presentation. So this is teachers lead, teachers lead PD, and I'm just going to go here. If you want to pick up the PowerPoint, it's uh it's right here. I got a question on another YouTube video. And this is just the PowerPoint right here, right? Educating ELL students. This is a PD presentation. So you can pick it up at the teacher store. And it's linked on my YouTube channel. All right, so thank you for sitting through the presentation.